the boss kind of elevated me completely inadvertently in what was actually an attempt to constantly humiliate me by making, you know, all the cracks on the stage about, you know, Stohr B4 all the time. And I suppose I was supposed to feel humiliated. I don't think I really did. It's not like I wouldn't say I liked it's not at all like I liked the attention or but the fact that, yeah, everybody remembers me. Um, and because we were in such an oppressed environment, I think there, you know, there's this kind of attitude of, you know, Stohr was the one that got out from under the boot. Stohr was the, you know, our, our hearts were with him a lot more than I realized. I almost felt like, you know, in much of my life, I felt like almost not an outcast exactly, but not part of the group kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the reunion made me realize actually it wasn't like that at all, you know. That in fact I had my and it wasn't so much me that did it, it was the boss that did it, quite inadvertently. It's funny how that works out.
Yeah.
I think when you try and, it's like when you try and stamp out the rebel, and the rebel really wasn't doing that much. But, you know, the authorities came along and they stomped on him, and suddenly, you know, a sort of legend was created. I wasn't, you know, I don't think I was that naughty in hindsight. Yeah, maybe. Most of you will remember my special relationship with the boss, with him constantly inviting me to his office. Though, to be honest, my actual crime was mostly avoidance. But with the boss's help, my transgressions got hugely amplified. I see they no longer name the miscreants in morning assembly, which seems a good change. It may also mean that no one will ever match my notoriety. Truth is, I didn't pitch up for my appointments, especially on Friday, rather putting off the inevitable caning until Monday. And then on Monday, well, I may as well stay home. Same routine with DT. It was about living in the now, and there were better things to do after school. Of course, I was then unable to produce a sick note, so another offense. Failure to produce sick notes in those days was dealt with by the boss's cane. Nobody ever called my home, and so my father really wasn't any the wiser. He did go to a PTA once with the result that he ended up dating Jillian Parker. He'd arrived at the meeting with their teachers all sitting in a big hall and Miss Parker sitting alone. So he approached her and asked her what she taught. Sex, psychology, and religion, she said. He pointed out that religion didn't begin with an S. She told him the smarter ones knew that psychology didn't begin with an S either, but I think she had him on the first one. I'm not shifting blame for my problems, but the fact that my mother was in Canada and my father was banging Jill Parker may hint at my home life not being too grounded. As a natural consequence for my lack of attendance, B4 had to be repeated and the boss got to run his gag for another year. Finally, I did make it to C4. Then, following my arrest in the matter of 72 missing Fords, actually I was a backseat passenger maybe half a dozen times, but, you know, so be it. I went to Canada and many wondered what the fuck happened to B. Stohr. I wasn't quite dragged out of school in cuffs, but pretty close. From SACS, I went to attend Canada's first free school based on a model in the UK by A.S. Neil called Summerhill. So while you guys went to the army, and I have to say I've been really moved by a few comments that have been made about the impact conscription had on many of you. I'm also proud that you guys are able to acknowledge those effects on your lives in the way that you are. No Stockholm syndrome, but of course I feel lucky to have dodged that. Though, funnily, I strangely regret not having that shared experience. I know I shouldn't. I went from one of the strictest environments to the complete opposite, called Everdale, based on a school in the UK, as I'd mentioned. It was set on a farm in a communal setting. This freedom meant, not surprisingly perhaps, that zero academic work was done. I did learn many skills. We had a bakery, a wood shop. We had a bakery, a wood shop, farming, small construction projects, and of course, what I really wanted, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Somewhere I learned, and it may have been the drugs, that you can do anything one sets one's mind to. But SACS was really my last formal education. The letters behind my name are actually B4, but I've done all right. From there, I hitched up to the Yukon, worked in logging mines, in a sawmill, built a cabin in the woods, worked as a horse wrangler, a dishwasher, did construction work and other manual, menial jobs, drove a taxi for a few years, and I think I'm probably missing a few things. Then later in Toronto, I did an African music show for 25 years and also organized an African music festival, which today is the largest such festival in the world. In my late 20s, I settled into a career in adolescent mental health, helping troubled teenagers. I started with a job at the lowest rung, working overnight in a group home. 15 years later, I was a program supervisor without any actual qualifications other than my graduation from B4. The institution did lots of in-house training, so that's how I managed to become seen as being qualified. I was also the local union president, and as a natural shit disturber, led a couple of successful high-profile protest campaigns, one over the attempted closure of the provincially run treatment center where I worked, and the other with the city of Toronto trying to shut down the African Music Festival that I organized because it was too noisy. In fact, there was a period where I was in 2 news stories. Those news stories kind of run at the same time. So there is a hint of the spirit applied here too, I think. Let us be judged by our deeds. The bits of paper aren't as important as being able to do the job. Though with all due respect to the more educated ones, I would have done better if I'd attended more classes somewhere. It was just as well, of course, I practiced in Canada and not in Cape Town. If you can imagine your teenagers misbehaving and you engage a therapist for help, you walk into the office and it's Stohr from B4. Probably wouldn't fill you with a lot of confidence, but you've got to admit when it comes to misbehaving adolescents, I am an expert. Oh yeah, there were a couple of wives along the way, 3 kids who seemed to turn out okay, and 4 grandchildren. I'm now retired, a pensioner, and splitting my time between Canada and in Newlands, depending on the weather. I was always going to come back here. I always, we're sons of Table Mountain. So my current venture to keep myself occupied is bringing this Afrofest music festival to Cape Town. We'll see how that goes. In partnership with the Canadian Music Festival. So far, this seems to have been a pretty positive response. And I guess in closing, I just want to say that I really do have mixed feelings about whether SACS was a good education. In some ways it was, with wonderful facilities. On the other hand, a lot of what we were subjected to was just pure savagery and backward thinking. Teachers that brought planks to school as teaching aids and routinely dished out various forms of physical punishment. It's one thing I did learn in my life, is I'm quite convinced of this. Punishment of any kind absolutely doesn't work. I think I've applied that with working with teenagers. People would bring me the misbehaving teenager and the reluctant teenager because they'd all been convinced that somehow I was going to be the punishing guy that would make it all better. But no, I learned from people like Dick Smith, and I'm not sure what possible good one could have come from enduring an hour of Dick Smith. Though I also acknowledge that there were good teachers as well. I have a great respect for John Ince, who I got to know better through occasional visits. So, definitely a shout out to John Ince. Here's to your memory, and to the memory of the many that we've lost. Hopefully we all meet again at the 60th, though as has been said throughout the weekend that we spent together, the lions are now hunting on our side of the road. We definitely came from a background where punishment was at a premium for solving any problem, and I think it's still prevalent in schools in general, but in South African schools in particular. And honestly, I think it's one of the reasons where we have the problems we do as being, the violent society that it is, because all problems are seen to be, scope and door. we'll fix the problem. We'll just, if only we can find the right punishment. And no, I think it's a scientific fact with sort of animal behavior. If you take it down to a dog, you can change a dog's behavior. You can make it avoid the punishment, but it's still going to take the meat. It's you can never fundamentally change someone's behavior through punishment. I think that's very much a sort of scientific fact, if you will. I worked in the field for 30 years, and I started out being in a very behavioral situation where I worked with autistic kids, and we literally used to restrain them at a little tap. Every that was like their program was to be like jumped on and restrained till they would stop wriggling. I mean, I didn't last very long in that. It's sort of behaviorist Skinner, BF Skinner's sort of behaviorist approach, which I was like clearly not suited to. And then using that experience, I managed to get a job dealing with adolescents. And I still think my bent was, don't mess with this guy. He can, whether it was the physical training or whether it was just that this guy's kind of got the angles covered. You don't mess with him. But I got to the point where when I sort of I just found myself being more effective when I was less like that, when I was more, how can I and I also found the workplace a lot more enjoyable. I was no longer going into a conflict zone, and a lot of conflict with staff on how to handle situations, conflict with kids. And, so work was kind of a stressful conflict zone at a certain point. Until I started going, and just, till my attitude was just simply, how can I? And sometimes I couldn't help a lot, and sometimes I could. But it also meant that I got to the point where I really enjoyed going to work every day, because I didn't feel responsible for controlling this person. Like, in the field, a lot of people feel like if you're a teacher, your job is to control the class. And if you just let that go, your job isn't to control the class. Your job is to inspire the class. Your job is to get them thinking. When you're doing a book study, and I got a really good lesson from a teacher in this too. Someone you're doing some book study, and the teacher says, "Well, what do you think of this character?" And one of the students says, "Well, I think he's a fucking arse." And hey, that's not good language to use in class. That's not okay. That's misbehaving. And being stopped by the teacher and being told, "Hold on, why do you think he's not?" Well, because he did this, and this is what he did. And in the end, if you could only tune into that, the kid's actually giving a brilliant insight into the book and the character, and like kind of gets the whole story. But too often, we shut down teenagers because we want to make them behave, and and just finding out what's happening in teenagers' lives. Like, for all the shit I got into, and nobody ever said what's going on in your life. Like, they just did. That wasn't an option. It was it was much better for the boss to humiliate you, but just to like, and that is the essence of how to deal with teenagers. And find out what's going on in their lives. Stop trying to, again, punish them and set boundaries for them and think that's going to make. Just stop and listen to them. What's going on in your life? How can I help? So I don't know that exactly explains why punishment doesn't work, but anybody's welcome to Google it. How to effectively punish. There is no writing on that, because there is no such thing as effective punishment. And it's quite, when you do it from animal experiments to, but but it's human. It's human nature, and I think maybe we can all relate to it a little bit. So all those canings did. There was absolutely no value in all those canings. Did did they damage? Yeah, not really. I wouldn't. It's not like it was a terrible thing. It's just that they were in a. That's my story on why punishment doesn't work. My classic situation would be a family brings the misbehaving youth that this guy's going to fix into the meeting, and the kids go, "I don't want to." And first of all, I tell them we only accept you if you actually want to be here, and that helps a little bit. But the other thing I would say to them in front of their parents is, well, as a teenager, typically 15 or 16, the first thing you have to do is stop listening to your parents and your teachers for that. And the parents are like, whoa, 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 whoa. this is backfiring. We brought you here because you're not listening. And this guy's saying you have to stop listening to your parents. And then, of course, the other shoe drops, which is, yeah, but now you're responsible for your own decision and you have to accept the consequences thereof. So don't think that that the fact that you don't have to listen to your parents is an easy way out, because now it's all on you, young, and that is the essence of that separation, and you introduced that very well. That's who we figure out who we are, at that age, by telling the world around us to fuck off. It seems like completely opposite, but yeah, that's for each of us how we kind of established our identity and figured out who we are. Complying isn't an option to become it's hugely overrated. I don't think any of us weren't most great things done by people being prepared to break the rules. Those that followed the rules kind of got. That's my life mantra. Break the rules, kid. Test the limits. Break the rules. It's all. You land on your feet.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how the kids respond to when the other.
Well, I think in a good way. I think they get the good message out of it, but I think they also, hopefully are sensible enough, and they do. They kind of go, yeah, because. Yeah, the initial thrill of I'm going to get away with hell is like, it's going to be a bit more complicated than that. You're not going to get away with. Doesn't mean you're going to get away with anything. In fact, it may mean you can get away with less. I've been like that. I've been like my kids too. I think with my kids, there've been times where it's been, gee, Dad, could you just beat us and get this over with? No. Sorry, guys, we're not done here yet. But also, I think that essence of any teenager comes home, and this is advice I give to any teenager comes home. You go, what did you do today? They did niks met niemand. And to pick that out of them as an interviewer, to pick that out of them. Well, where did you go, and who did you do it with, and and when and why and how, and I think if you're doing enough of that, it's very difficult for your kids to get involved in too much shit, because they're gonna. I know everything that Mike. A little scary. So I don't think my youngest one, especially, he doesn't tell his mother everything. I keep the channels of communication open. I think the kids are all right in general. I'm definitely on the other side of the coin when everybody thinks that, what we've been saying, as long as man's been around, actually, that the kids of today have no respect. I think they found some of the oldest tablets in the world, some, Babylonian script or something, and they eventually deciphered these stone tablets, and they said the youth of today has no respect. And I think the youth of today, like, compared to us, things that we did at school in those days were like, sort of, yeah, kids wouldn't do that nowadays. We harassed the teachers and, did things to each other, and the sort of bullying and all the shit that went on that was Yeah, I think generation by generation, the youth actually, there's hope.
I
Yeah.
think the youth of today being disrespectful is kind of key to the job.
Well, yeah,
It's
it's
their
how
job.
they learn, right?
How do the parents react when the second shoe?
Uh, because when the first shoe dropped, they went, "Oh my God!" They're ready to pick up the bag, which is a complete turnaround. Remember when they walk in the door, it's the parents and a social worker and a teacher dragging them in. They're going, "This place will help you," and the kid goes, "Oh no, I don't want to. Fuck off, get out!" And yeah, now it. But once they realize that yeah, it's not actually going to be so easy. I think that their their initial they're relieved that oh, it's not going to be quite like that. And then a lot of the work from then on is maintaining a relationship with them. I mean, that's probably the difference. Sort of treatment center compared to just a straight school. I'll be calling you all, whereas, and I won't just be calling you when your kid's bad. So there'll be a different kind of relationship when you do get the call, because it won't, or normally you get you get a call from the school. It's like, oh my God, what's he done now? It won't be like that. I'll just, that's part of their commitment, being in touch and trying to tell them about, the progress their kid is making and the good things they're doing. Focused on all the bad things, they can actually see strengths in their adolescent instead of them being just pile of. I don't think it was like an epiphany. It was just that slow progress of kind of letting go of that role. It felt like I had to control this, to learning just to take a step and try and respond to what's. So yeah, letting go of the control and realizing that sort of need to control was getting in the way of good work. It wasn't the. And yeah, that was a transition, because initially it felt like that was the job is to control the situation. The job is to control this class. The job is to make sure someone doesn't misbehave, and patting them on the back for not misbehaving. Life's a whole lot more, especially the life of a teenager is a whole lot more complicated as far as finding your own way through, finding your own answers. So I wouldn't say it was a slow transition, a slow bleed until as I mentioned before, the leading with how can I help, with love, if not in the but leading with your heart in a positive way, and going, well, then if you're doing that, then it's difficult to make it's you can't really go if that's your intention you're leading with. But if the intention you're leading with is to control, then boy, you're going to go wrong all over the place. I'd say probably the same thing with probably with my first kids. I was more needed to, like for instance, and I learned how to be a better parent. With the first kids, I would battle about eating your vegetables, for instance. Have these kind of conflicts where you can't leave the dinner table until you finish your vegetables or your whatever, because I've spent all this time preparing this food, and you can't just and there were conflict and tears and typical parent. With my youngest kid, and I must say he's had it a lot easier. The rule was simple: you have to sit with us when we eat. Well, I don't want to eat. You don't eat, but this is our. So there was no conflict, and so the kid would sit there after a couple of minutes. Then, just because the food is there and they're hungry, but you don't have to eat. We're just going to catch, but this is the time we catch up on our day, and how was school and what's happening with your friends and what did you do and what did you study. I remember my kid's first day in high school. I made his life hell. I interviewed him for like 4. Like, how can you keep doing this to me? It's like, no, hold on. Who sat to your left? Who sat to your right? Who sat behind you? What was the teacher's name? What about the subjects? And then we go through all this. It takes about half an hour. It's like, are we done now? No, we've only got through the first period. So then what did you do at break? And what did you do at lunch? And he's like, oh my God, Dad, could you just stop? But got to stay engaged. So the younger, we get better at parenting. I don't know if would be the same for all of us. It's often the oldest kid that we learned on, and it's usually the same scenario of we felt this need to like make them behave and make them control them, and the youngest one we kind of give up on all that. We got tired and often the younger ones turn out don't have the same sort of anxieties or it's a healthy thing. I got to be a better parent I was a better parent to teenagers. Just because of my background, maybe because of my training, maybe because of my I felt like I was an okay parent with teenagers. With little kids, I just played a lot. That's what dad should do with little. This is all you need to do. Just play with them. Forget all the rest of the nonsense. Just get out there, play ball. I think it's probably better for mothers to do consequences. I've come to believe that. Let dad play because mom's also feeding them, and it's all kind of tied into that. Maybe I'm referring to stereotypically traditional role. I guess we live in the world. It doesn't have to be mom feeding them, but no, mom's got breasts. She's a nurturer. Maybe it's easier to be corrected by that. And I think also there's a natural tendency for boys to be protective of, challenge their father, kind of, always. My kids are awful. They always take her side.
You mentioned that you sit down as a family for dinner every night, and that's the family. Was that something you had?
Yeah, there was not that, but no, we didn't. No, I guess in my own case, my mother had gone to Canada, so my mother had left when I was, I guess 11 or 12 or something like that. My dad was, the reality of all that. His wife had left him and gone to Canada, and he went through job changes as well. He used to work at the Cape Argus, and he went back to UCT and eventually became a lecturer there. But no, it's no resentment for that. I mean, the man was he wasn't very effective. He didn't know how to be a very effective. And he was trying to, sort his own life. And I understand that in later, and that it kind of is what it is. But yeah, he was having a hard time in his own life, keeping his head above water, and as I say, his wife had left him. Yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is. I had my first kid at 20, and I didn't actually start working in the mental health field until I was 28. So when my kid was born, I was driving it. Yeah, I was already. Yeah, I was 28. I'd kind of spent my time doing schlocky, kind of the first real job I had, I guess, up until then. And now, can you call driving a taxi a job? But I did that, I enjoyed driving a taxi, actually. I spent a lot of time just doing a lot of different things. I'd gone up north, and, the South African goes to northern Canada kind of thing, and, worked in logging and sawmills and mines and all of those things. Quite how I fell into let's see what becoming a parent meant that I couldn't just take a job for a few months and wander off anymore. I kind of had to sort of, it ended up with me, driving a taxi for a good maybe 6 years. I loved it in the beginning. It's one of those things where when I didn't know what I was, and I didn't know my way around and was learning, and once I knew what I was, it got. In the beginning, I used to be interested in listening to everyone's life stories. Get in the back seat, and I'd come home, and I would share with my partner about the different things that had happened during the day. And after a while, it just got. I sit in the back seat. I'll drive you from A. Not interested to hear another life story. I kind of fell into the mental health world. I shared a home rented a house with a couple who was one of them. He was a teacher, and his partner was working in the mental health. And I had a bit of background in it because my mother was a clinical psychologist. My stepfather in Toronto was former professor of psychology at UC. So I knew I passed the job interview even though I didn't have any qualifications because I knew a little bit about parental. Didn't make me an expert, but I always had those experts actually to ask questions to and refer back to. Definitely ending up dealing with adolescence made me feel like this was my path. It's interesting how one develops a life path, isn't it? And then you realize that all the things you've done have prepared you for this particular task, even though you totally didn't realize it.
Absolutely.
C'est la vie. I used to be embarrassed to say I came from. I don't think I'm embarrassed anymore. I think the just because it's so middle class and entitled, and this whole concept of the best. If you went to a good school, you'll have all these opportunities in life. That will be your ticket. So you went to SACS, therefore you will go on and you'll be successful and have a great life. And it's bullshit. That can, it can just as well, it also teaches these kids that somehow because they're going to be successful. And success really has nothing to do with that. It's to do with how much you apply yourself, how hard you. I mentioned my stepfather, Kurt Danziger, who was professor of psychology at UCT, and actually a great in the history of psychology, and maybe one of the top academics South Africa has ever. So you'd think he must have gone to like SACS. It was Jewish, so you'd think maybe SACS or one of these type of schools. No, he went to Cape Town, and he knew that he was never going to be able to afford to go to university, so he had to work his ass off. And ended up going to Oxford on a. But I think this idea of if you went to a good school, you're going to be, successful can be an obstacle to actually doing the things you need to be successful. Yes, our backgrounds helped us to some degree, but these good schools are bullshit. Like we've got to be worried that we don't raise a bunch of entitled little shits that think they've got the ticket. And
do you think did SACS produce a bunch of entitled little?
I feel like the answer I want to give you is yes. What I've actually been I've been impressed by the class of 7. That's been less prevalent than I would expect in the maybe the persona of what I see them, coming out of there now. Actually, I'm surprisingly quite proud of our class of 70. In our own way, we seem to have Maybe we've just grown up to a point. I don't know. We seem fairly grown, seem to have come out all right. So, um, maybe the entitled little shit is not to do with us so much, but people's perception of it. So maybe I'm sharing that perception from the other side of but certainly going to SACS isn't going to get you anywhere. You know, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, we're all, I call them the pink countries on the map. Do they still do that? But all the, you know, the British Empire countries that meant that as an immigrant, there really was no trend. You know, you see other immigrants from China, immigrants from India, immigrants from all over the world. Our immigrant experience was quite seamless. We came from pretty much the same systems where, you know, the banking system was the same, but everything became the sort of British-based system that I guess there is also the realization that people often think if I'd grown up in a different place, would life have been entirely different? Would my existence have been entirely different? If I could just, I'm going to leave this country and I'm going to go somewhere else and it's all going to be different and it'll be better or it won't be better. And I think the reality is we have the backgrounds we have the skill sets we have, and no matter where we go, we're probably going to end up doing something similar. Like I think of the things I did in Canada, where I was, you know, involved in trade union stuff. I did a radio show on 89.5 FM. Coincidentally, that's also the kind of equivalent. There's an 89.5 FM, and I did so I got involved in radio. I got involved in, you know, childcare and working with adolescents. I think had I stayed in South Africa, I probably would have done exactly the same thing. You know, I probably would have ended up, I could have ended up. So maybe life is less to do with where you are than we think, and just a lot more to do with who you are, because the outcomes are going to be pretty much the same, no matter where in the world we are. I don't know if you relate to that if you'd stayed in South Africa, you may have ended up doing exactly the same things as you did in Australia. My dad gave everything he had no, most of what he had to charity, figure he could entrust. Other than, of course, you know, and who can deny the privilege of that, the property I had on Palmbrook, that really when I inherited it wasn't worth that, but you know, then just about 2000, the value of it went up hugely. Yeah, he gave all his all these other properties and earnings and savings to the South African Race Relations Institute, which I think was well intended. You know, it was someone who wanted to feel like, you know, he wanted to make some kind of difference. Yeah, I think that was a good thing for me. It was liberating in its own way. It meant that it meant that I had to develop that property kind of on my own. And yes, it was obviously an amazing property to do it. But I couldn't afford to do anything with it. I kind of left it for you know, 20, and during which time its rand value went up by about 40. Between how much land increases in that particular in that Newlands area in particular, from $2,000, between that and the rand dropping, but it's not. It's 40 times value in terms of the numbers, not actually in terms of real value. So yeah, privilege, entitlement, you know, whatever. I also could have just sold the property when I first inherited. Probably, yeah, you know, paid off my property in Toronto, and what my wife actually first wanted me to do. You know, what are you doing with the property in South Africa? Until it ended up being a masterstroke, just a property sit for 20 years in the Cape Town environment at the time. So
yeah,
2000, late 90s to it ended up being, and then you know, ended up being one of the best property markets in the world during that period in terms of its boosting. Right, the neolib thing. I know you know, you mentioned that quite often, and you know, right, we're definitely fucking struggling in this world right now, aren't we? With with the fundamental problem being, yeah, everything's being private. So my 45-year-old, almost 44-year-old, he is he works for the Dental College of Ontario, which means that if you have a complaint about your dent, he works in the complaints department. He's very diplomatic. So you know, but so he works from home. It's a bit of not the most exciting job, I must say, but it feeds, you know, puts food on. And I have a daughter who is 42, and she lives off grid in the. They bought 100 acres of land for like $20,000 a few years ago. Cheap land, and no running water, no electricity. Two kids that are now 15 and 17. So it's interesting transition time for because you know, they're heading off from kind of, you know, heading out into the world, and they've, you know, been homeschooled for the last, well, since the pandemic, have been home. Um, so it's going to be interesting. the my granddaughter, actually, just for a sort of wacky look at the world, because they do have internet of some. So her like thing and what she's into, living out you know, miles away from anyone in the limited contact with people outside of her family. She's into, so she's got, you know, Korean pop. So she's got her hair living in the bush there. She's got her hair done. You know, they got the big mop in the front, the kind of, you know, Korean look. And you know, she thinks maybe she'll move to Korea when she's finished living in the bush, and go and teach English.
Wow, talk about rapid fire.
My youngest kid was a superstar at high school, at school all the way through. He top student, top athlete. Came home with all the awards, you know, best math mark in the school, all these, and got into University of Toronto, the physics and math program, um, uh, without any real sense of what he wanted. You know, the reason he did math and physics is because he was good at it. But then he found out he bombed. He went from being like superstar to completely bombing at university. Not because he couldn't do it, but because he didn't know why he was, and he preferred working. So my wife worked in a roofing, selling roofing supplies. So he got a job at the front desk, and that was he would do during his during his day off. He would go and work. And yes, he stopped talking about school. School was obviously bombing. You know, he was really competitive. So to go into a class of 30, be like driven to get the top mark, it was, you know, it worked for him. Being in a class of 700 and nobody gives a shit whether you're there or not, and they're all top students, you know, they're all just to get into the program, and they're like international students, and yeah, he sort of but then so he worked at the kind of front, and then he was recruited by one of the big roofing companies. So now he's 27, but he's a supervisor for this roofing company. He does all he dispatches the crews, and has to be at work at 6 o'clock. But he's been doing this for about 3 years, making good, um, and seems happy. seems well balanced. Being the youngest kid, seems to be the most balanced of doesn't seem to pretty confident in himself, doesn't seem to suffer much anxiety. Thinks thinks he can do anything, which is kind of um like tech stuff. I just give it to him, and he even if he doesn't know how to, he'll solve. And he's got that confidence that he pretty much thinks he can go to a YouTube video and figure out anything he wants. And so yeah, he's and where I've arrived at in a way. I mean, it's not that I loved working with teenagers. It did give me pleasure in the end of it when I learned how to stop being in conflict. But yeah, just do what you love. It sounds so easy, but so that's I've dug. My African music stuff was always a way of keeping in touch with the Cape Town spirit in me, keeping in touch with where I come. I think maybe you moved later. Maybe it's a similar experience when it's the immigrant experience where you initially go and you kind of try and fit. And as a white South African, especially, you kind of want to go under the radar and become Canadian or Australian or whatever. And then after a while, you realize that that's totally who I am, and everybody identifies you as the South African. And eventually you start exploring that more and appreciating it more, and it develops into, so it's not like I would, when I got to Canada, I was looking for, South African connections. In fact, I was probably trying to, and then, you kind of develop an identity. And for me, it was probably around the anti-apartheid. You went to those ANC rallies and I lucked into, I came to South Africa in '85. And I collected a stack of records, and that was during time of Paul Simon and Graceland. And suddenly South African music was so I came back to Canada with kind of a stack of LP, all the background music from that. And Hot Sticks was one of them, definitely. Stimela, Vazo, and all that. So someone said there was just a new fledgling radio station opening, and they said, hey, you want to come in and do it? Yeah, sure. So I came in with my stack of albums. Of course, learned during that process that yes, I knew a little bit about African music from a South African perspective, but I really knew nothing. And yet here I was with this sort of African music. And then I met some people, some Kenyans that had a music shop, and I used to go and borrow records from them to come and do on because I ran my collection only took me so. And then I remember one of the first shows I did, someone called and they said, could you play some? Franco is like the godfather of Congolese rumba or soukous. I didn't know who he was. How can you do a show on African music and you don't even know who Franco is? But I guess that realization of anything you do in life that you're successful, at some point you jumped in there knowing, and it's a matter of being brave enough or stupid enough to be someone that knows fuck all and tries to pull it off anyway. And then years later, after that, I did it for 25 years. So I started off knowing nothing, and knowing a little bit about Africa, and then getting involved in the festival, which again, at the initial stage, I knew very little. But 25 years later, things we're successful at that we initially jump into and know absolutely nothing. Being brave enough to jump in somehow. It's like the negativity and the constant complaining. My running joke that's sort of along the same line. The big thing is, How are you? Well, I've got nothing to complain, being our typical South African saying, except in South Africa, that's a complaint. Sorry, the ones that are most unhappy here seem to be the ones that are most it's a crazy thing. Yeah, and unfortunately, I must say lately, I've always been a defender of you guys, you all complain, and in fact, everything works. You're living in the most beautiful, privileged situation you can possibly be in, and you're sitting around complaining about how shit everything is. I mean, really, people. Although uh, things are things are things are feel pretty hopeless here now. More legitimately so than I've ever thought. It feels like the old regime is collapsing, or the current regime is collapsing. There's nothing really on the horizon to replace. And it always seems like a regime on its last leg does the worst things. So, the worst atrocities of apartheid weren't in the 60s or 70s, when they were still trying to maintain some kind of semblance of, you think you're going to be there for the long haul, so you don't really fuck people over too much. When you realize by the time the late 80s, the mid to late 80s happened, and the apartheid government knew that's when they did their worst. And that's when they began to stuff their pockets and put gold bars into airplanes, and just take all they could while the getting was good. And that seems to be kind of what's happening. They know they're not around for too much longer. So stuff your pockets, and there's no longer even an attempt within the current government to try and like save the situation anymore. I don't feel like they're all finger pointing and bloody powers off, but all they can do is point fingers at each other. Nobody actually has a plan to get a meaningful plan to get the light. We can just find someone to blame. It'll be great. But then what? I enjoyed the class of 73. I felt like there was, there was a lot of, yes, and people were aware of their privilege, and felt blessed by their privilege, felt like, we've had,
yeah,
but not blinded to it. Less so. I almost expected more of that kind of attitude of, yeah, I'm a self-made man, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, no, we're all very, very fortunate to have come from the backgrounds, and it's the rest of our backgrounds. It's not specifically the SACS experience. I think that was really strong in our group. Our guest speaker at the last dinner was like a COSATU trade union rep,
Carl,
and everyone was very receptive to what he, receptive to was, there was nobody that was really, attacking him or is this like leftist crazy. He talked about that the rich and poor divide. As long as that exists in this country, we're always going to have the corruption that we have. For instance, I guess that was his biggest. He described somebody who he knew that was the integrity commissioner in the COSATU office, and she was. He spoke to her one day, and she was complaining to him about how all the key people in the office were continually picked up to get government jobs, and they continually got these great opportunities, and she, being the integrity commissioner and being a woman, was not getting any of those opportunities. But she saw all the people around her getting rich, and then she took 20,000 rand to move someone up the line for an RDP house. Not a lot of money. And lost her job and he said it was like, he could almost see her point of view when she was working within the system that she was living in, where, gee, all these guys are getting all this great opportunity, and she's just not. Did she do wrong? Well, yes, but in another way, you can kind of see a point. He was also saying that union members, the kind of trend now is they don't want to elect a leader because they realize that the moment they elect leaders, which of course you have to have, how else are you going to negotiate? But the moment they elect leaders, those leaders are just getting picked. So it starts out with them going and having lunch in the boss's office, which you have to do, I guess, if you're going to negotiate. But next thing they've been offered perks and la la la, and so anyway, they're even rejecting the idea of electing a leader. I don't know how you possibly can negotiate without one, but it's a dilemma. Willem Otten I've seen occasionally, not for quite a few years, but he was helping me out with drawing up plans for my other house at some point, and Willem ended up in a pretty good place.
Okay.
He's a very calm and mellow guy on the inside, he's so he's done all right. Louis Bab, he's living in France.
Yeah.
I think that Louis Babbitt is sort of in hindsight, a psychopath, so has not a lot of capacity to pursue the past for the sake of relation. I don't think Louis really connected like that. So if Louis comes looking for you, he probably wants something from you. I just, that's my sense of who Louis is, and I don't know if you really knew many of the others. Peter Garnett was a guy. The real key to that Ford gang thing was Louis met these two crazy brothers, Gary and anyway, they were that went to St. George's in Run, and that was putting a flame to those guys, and they kind of escalated that whole. They went out and they got all the master keys to all these phones, and it took me a while to figure out that I'd always kind of felt like I was equally responsible in a way, like he didn't, but then realizing, hold on, what actually happened is they found things that were stolen from the cars. The brother Bobby from Rondebosch. They found their father had found like guns and stuff, stolen stuff, hidden under the floorboards of. So the police had come to their house. The dad had called the police, feeling that was the right thing. And then, so they identified people that were part of their. So I guess they identified Louis. They got pressured by the police, identified Louis, and then the cops arrived at my house with like all the rest of the people. I was probably the last one around. And they kind of showed up a carload of them, and they had identified me as being part of the. In reality, I was only in the back seat just a few times, like but there was none of us got lawyers. There was no. I don't ever remember being questioned by the police as far as where were you and which ones were you involved in, and they just rounded us all up, threw us all in jail together, and we each got charged with the same 72 charges. Whereas I kind of look back at that and I really I was very much convicted. Didn't even think of fighting it. Didn't even think of resisting and going, that wasn't, that I was only there, and it would have been stupid maybe to have, but we were all strung up, and as I say, the police, like literally, there was no making statements. It's sort of crazy when you look back at it. I guess I'd done enough other bad things. I probably didn't want them to come in and search my house for dacha or all the other things that but yeah, didn't have it very well worked out in my head. But in reality, I was quite on the periphery It was just, you know, how you string up a bunch of teenagers and you go, okay, and you make them, you know, you make them all spill the beans, which I don't really blame anyone for, because that's what cops, you know, that's what cops do. When they when they're dealing with kids, basically, you know,
That's what they
easy
do.
to include them, get them
Like, did that?
to say anything. I went to Canada and have an effect on my life in Canada, and I suppose here it was juvie stuff. So, it wasn't fortunately, it had no effect in my life. I mean, I took my 6th cut, and it was real cuts. Yeah, that was like the cut. I think I probably still have scars from it, but and where the cane go, they lay you down over a, and they put this saltwater soaked rag over your barrel, and the guy takes a 4-step run up before he lays down. So they were quite a bit more intense than the you just kind of grit your teeth. 1, okay, 2, 3. By the 4th one, it was a little bit, and it's like 5, all right, 6 times. You get up. I remember giving the guy that had dished out the cut some fucking arrogant look. But yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, 6 cuts, and it was. See, I think I went to one probation officer. I was off to Canada by then, and you know, I remember the real moment when my dad came into the, or all the rest of the guys, like we sat we were in Weinberg prison for a week together in the initial, before we got, you know, let out on bail. My dad, he said, I can't tell the court I can control this young man. I have no control. So all the rest of the Ford gang went back to their homes, and I went off to Kai until guilt got the better. And when he did that, I was like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I mean, we had a falling out over that for fucking years. And again, I know that he was trying to do the best, but in his own dumb way. It was like, you know, the worst thing that was actually freaking helpful at that particular time. But I, you know, basically told him to fuck him, you know, and had made the decision that I was going to stay, that I was going to go to, which all worked out very well. And I've really dug this whole process, actually. The whole class of 73 has been, I have looked forward to it and wondered what it would be like. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot more. It's been a lot more than I expected.